Welcome to the House by the Video Store video blog. I'm William, and with me today is...
Derek.
And we're going to be talking about the 1991 film, The Silence of the Lambs. This was the movie that introduced America to Hannibal Lecter in a major way, because, of course, previously the character appeared in the 1986 Michael Mann film Manhunter. And in that movie, the character was portrayed by Brian Cox, but that movie really wasn't that much of a hit and has only gone on to become kind of a cult movie in the past, 20 or so years after its release. But Silence of the Lambs was a huge, huge movie. It was a movie that won a bunch of Oscars. So it won Best Picture, it won the Male and Female Acting Awards, Best Screenplay, Best Director. It was a massive box office success. And a lot of people say that it was the first horror movie that won an Oscar. It's kind of debatable as to whether or not it's a horror film, but it definitely fits somewhere in that wheelhouse. And the movies prior to that at least got nominated were Jaws and The Exorcist. Jaws is another movie people today probably wouldn't really see too much as a horror movie, but at the time it came out, it was.
Yeah, I think they would both fall in like that, I guess, like suspense thriller category. I mean, something like that. Because like Silence of the Lambs, like all those movies incorporate horror elements.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't overall say that they were horror movies. Now, I would say Silence of the Lambs probably is bloodier than Jaws. I mean, I had to go back and like watch them comparatively, but I don't, like Jaws was done in the 70s, right? So I don't really feel like for a lot of blood back then probably wasn't a lot,
I mean, there was blood like in the water and things like that, but you didn't have like gruesome shots of like limbs being taken off by the shark piece by piece. Partially because the technology wasn't there, and that really wasn't, Spielberg's thing. He was more about suspense and things like that.
That was also the time when in westerns when people would get shot 7 times.
Yeah.
No blood. So
Yeah, but like when Silence of the Lambs came out, I was 6 years old, so I did not see this movie in the theaters.
I was 1, so I definitely
I did not, like neither of us saw this movie in the theaters. I do remember hearing about it, and I remember seeing the movie poster and the VHS cover.
I'm glad you brought that up because to me, out of all the movies when I was young, I've seen them in like, your blockbusters and we have Roadrunner Video that was around for a little while.
West Coast Video.
Yeah, West Coast Video. Yeah, Hollywood. I remember that one always stood out just because the cover is creepy.
Yeah.
And it was just different. Like, it wasn't a whole lot going on. I think it was just kind of subtle, but it worked. And it's just something I've always remembered out of all the film covers is just that one.
Well, actually, too, I remember at the time seeing the cover for Manhunter because it showed, a character from that. And it was another... I think since then they've changed the posters or the covers they use for those movies, at least on the version that I have. But I do remember, in the movie store, the movie cover is kind of what got you interested in the movies. And I remember hearing that Silence of the Lambs, when it came out, I remember hearing that it was scary. And then seeing that cover made me always kind of want to see it. Then I did see it a few years later when I was just a little bit older on TV. And because it was one of those movies they'd always run nonstop when they got the rights to it. But Hannibal Lecter... one of the most memorable movie characters of all time, really. A brutal killer who also had like a sense of humor. And I mean, compare it to like a Michael Myers or a Jason or something like that. He could be just as deadly.
Actually, more deadly, because like with Michael Myers, he would just stab you, but Hannibal Lecter would cut you apart, and he would do it with class.
He would eat your liver with a fava bean.
Yeah, and like he would do it with a little bit more class than they would do it too.
I mean, that's not to say that like if you had Hannibal Lecter and Michael Myers that Hannibal would win because Michael Myers is kind of unstoppable.
And Hannibal, at the time, Anthony Hopkins was probably, I don't know. I mean, he's one of those guys that since I've been alive has always been kind of old.
Yeah.
So like I don't really know his exact age in the movie, but I'd say he's probably like late 40s or 50s.
When this movie came out?
Yeah. So like he's not a physically intimidating individual, but with his skills and knowledge of being like being a doctor and knowing what to attack makes him pretty lethal.
And part of it too, like the character was written like he was never like a physical specimen that could take everyone out in the room without, like a Jason Bourne style fight or something. But
I don't want to see Anthony Hopkins.
But it was just that he could kind of fit into normal society. He could walk around.
And nobody would know anything. If you just talked to him, you wouldn't know about it. Kind of like, this is skipping to Hannibal, but toward the end of the movie, doesn't he give a kid brain? And they're sitting in the airplane, he's eating, he's like, oh, what's that?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like he just kind of blends in. He just looks like your normal person.
And two, like, there's been multiple iterations of this character. So Silence of the Lambs, I think, out of all of the Hannibal Lecter movies, Silence of the Lambs is, in my opinion, the best. I mean, I really like that movie. It's a movie that I can always go back and rewatch. There's nothing about it that's dated. There's no bad effects. There's no real bad acting. It's all a solid movie that you can rewatch. I mean, there's a reason that won the awards that it did. Now, the other movies in the series, so Hannibal was a movie that I remember seeing in the theaters. It was more gory, it had more violence. It was directed by Ridley Scott, who had done, a ton of great stuff. But just that movie kind of was a little bit over the top, and it took Hannibal Lecter from being kind of like a creepy, classy killer to being almost like a cartoon.
Yeah, because in that movie, he's kind of like killing people left and right almost, it seemed like. 'Cause I feel like the death counts were a lot smaller in Silence of the Lambs.
Well, it's like any of the movies. I mean, the Silence of the Lambs is more of like, he said people considered it a horror film. It's more of like a crime, mystery, drama. And Hannibal is more of like, almost like a classy slasher.
Yeah, it really is, especially because isn't Ray Liotta pretty much a dick in that movie too?
Well, yeah, he's like sexist and not a great dude. Doesn't really deserve to have his head cut off and be fed his own brains, but he wasn't, a nice guy.
Who is the deformed dude in it?
Oh, Gary Oldman.
Yeah, because I didn't even know that was
Mason
him
Verger.
Till,
So you had those. So you had Hannibal that kind of took the character of Hannibal Lecter like in a much darker direction than Silence of the Lambs, and then you had Red Dragon, which was another movie based on the book Red Dragon. So like we said, there was the original film by Michael Mann, Manhunter, and Red Dragon. So that story's been told twice. And there was the excellent NBC series that I think actually is gorier than any of the movies. And that is a much different take on the Hannibal Lecter character and Will Graham. But back to Silence of the Lambs.
Well, I think another thing, too, is like Anthony Hopkins' character in that was, he was just really interested in the relationship he developed. I can't think of her name now.
Clarice Starling?
Yeah, Clarice. Like, the relationship they developed was just kind of interesting because he almost kind of like fell in love with her, too, a little bit, didn't he?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you read the book Hannibal, so this is all spoilers. I think this from the top, it's all spoilers. Like, so in the book Hannibal, him and Clarice actually go off together as lovers, as opposed to the movie that didn't happen. And, but he always, he respected her and liked her and, even loved her. And she, I think, had kind of a respect for him as well, just because, in Silence of the Lambs, when the one guy famously throws his baby batter on Clarice, Hannibal just, says that, he's like a cretin and then talks him into eating his own tongue and dying. So Hannibal has like a little bit of class and decorum. He won't call you he won't be, he won't treat a woman in an unladylike fashion. He'll just eat her.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue into talking about Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, so Ted Levine, who has been in a ton of stuff since then, but I still think the thing he'll be known for most is, dancing in the mirror and like,
yeah, that's
would you blah, blah, blah,
well, it's funny because like the first time I watched that movie was probably when I was actually probably too young to watch it.
Yeah.
So when I see that scene, because I probably watched it when I was like probably younger than 10, so I didn't really fully understand it. Then you go watch it now and you realize just how messed up that person actually was.
Yeah.
And then you have probably one of the more infamous like lines of dialogue in any movie ever about the lotion. Like
it puts the lotion on its skin.
The thing I think is funny about that though too is like you have people referencing that in like children cartoons.
Yeah.
Because I've seen stuff on Cartoon Network and stuff when I was younger where you hear that reference, and it's like the bad thing is like, that's definitely not oriented toward. It's just funny how that's just crossed so much different forms of media and how just of a major line that was.
Yeah, I mean, like that movie, like
or iconic line.
Like you talk about movies like The Exorcist is something that's forever been a part of popular culture since its release. Like we said, Jaws.
Yeah. Or just especially the theme music that's used in like everything.
And then, something like, Halloween is something that was such a big cultural phenomenon that everyone's aware of it. Not that like any of these movies invented all the things they became famous for. They just did it very well and were the big box office hits, so they're the ones people remember. And then you have plenty of other movies over the generations that have like elements that seep into the like popular culture. But Silence of the Lambs, like it puts the lotion on its skin. I guess we're gonna edit this, would you do me scene. Like, so there's a lot of stuff in that that's very iconic. And of course, like Hannibal Lecter, it's like I had his liver with a nice Chianti and a fava bean. Like, you know, he's like a character that anybody could probably place the line of dialogue to who it is, even if they haven't seen the movie.
Yeah.
But, you know, horror-wise, I think that there was only a few parts of it that really kind of pushed it into horror territory. And it's kind of like Lecter's escape scene from prison.
Yeah.
And then the last part where Clarice goes to the house of Ted Levine's character, Jim Gum. And then there's like the night vision goggles, which that in and of itself was a very innovative scene that was incredibly effective. Yeah. And like, you just think about it, if you're in a stranger's house that's like a serial killer, and you're in a dark room and you don't know what's anything is in there, you don't know what it is, and you just saw a tub with an old dead lady, like, that would be a very terrifying situation to find yourself being a part of.
Yeah.
So, you know, once again, like, this movie, like, everything about it, top notch. One thing that's kind of funny watching it now is like the opening title credits. I mean, this is a lot of older movies. Just the credits, just like in context of today, it's like, oh, on Premiere, I can make something that looks nicer than that.
Yeah,
back in the day, it probably cost a lot of money, time, and effort to make those titles.
Yeah, it's just funny how that is, because like, you see, it's like, But like you said, that time in '91, that might have been great.
Like, aside from the haircuts and the clothes. There's nothing about this movie that's really dated. It's kind of like a timeless movie that you could show people 50 years from now.
Yeah, it's also a story, I think, too. Maybe, I don't know if that story would work all the time, because as technology advances, it'd be like, oh, you can use cell phones.
Yeah.
But, like, I still think it's kind of timeless in a sense. Like you said, especially the way they did the movie. Yeah. Like, if somebody watches it, like you said, multiple years from now, it's not going to be like, oh, man, that's hard to watch. It worked well. And there wasn't anything, they didn't have Creed playing in the background or whatever was popular in '91. So
it would have been Creed. It would have been like,
I don't even know.
See, that was before Nirvana and Pearl Jam really hit it big. So you'd still be like, I guess, like hair metal and power ballads and stuff.
Something awful.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that ties it directly to that.
They're not playing a Guns N' Roses song, which would not be terrible. Just it'd be terribly dating.
Yeah, but there's nothing in there like that. So I think that always helps too when the movie's scored correctly, because it tends to age better than if it's just got super era specific music.
And one thing too that might be viewed in a different lens now than when it was released is like the character of Jim Gum being like wanting to be like a transvestite, wanting to have sexual reassignment surgery. The way they approach those topics in '91 would not be the way they approach those topics today.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it wasn't about any group of people being mentally wrong. It was just about that one specific individual that was a crazy killer who latched on to something else. So I don't think it was anything that was negative towards any groups of people. It was just he was a crazy character that just happened to have these characteristics.
And you could add anything, but that's what he chose to go after. So.
And it is funny too, because I'm assuming at the time this came out, I looked at some of the older reviews. There were people who were like abhorred by the content of the movie and how violent it was. And, so it was one of the first, like, Oscar-winning movies that really was like, oh, this is too gory and horror-filled. If you rewatch it now, it's like CSI, Law and Order, like all those shows have more violence in them than this movie.
That's the thing that always kind of shocks you a little bit, too, is like you go back and watch some of these old horror movies, like, man, I see worse stuff on, like, ABC at 8 o'clock, with any of the crime scene shows.
ABC Family has a more violent show on than, Halloween.
But it's just, like, it just kind of blows your mind that that's like fine now, but it's all because it's like, oh, it's just a morgue. It's just a morgue scene. It's like, oh, okay, so you cut the guy's chest off and show it on TV, but you go watch movies like that, and it's just the scale of horror or gore is just off the charts.
Like I said,
now.
The NBC show Hannibal had more gore than these movies. It had more horrific scenes than these movies did that were rated R. And two, like, one thing I think kind of a cultural thing, like, I remember, so this movie came out in '91, then shortly thereafter, like in '93, the X-Files launched, and you had Twin Peaks around, 90, 91. So you had a lot of, like, this FBI investigation becoming part of the popular culture, where I don't think it was so much before that.
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of wondering if that kind of helped those things get popular, because you always kind of had a little bit of a similar vibe from X-Files. Not the same, but you could see where one influenced the other to
I think there was specific X-Files episodes where they tried purposefully not to get into the same territory as Silence of the Lambs, because they want people to think they're ripping it off with, Clarice Starling, Dana Scully, like red-haired FBI agent.
Yeah, they're kind of similar,
So I think that kind of kicked off a cultural shift too, and Now, do you think that the success of that movie made more people think like, oh, well, I can do well-regarded, critically liked, and successful movies in the horror genre, or that have heavy elements of horror, and it not be, like, oh, well, this is just for teenagers at drive-ins on dates. This is actually a substantive movie.
But yeah, because that movie actually had, if you took out the gore, you just have a crime thriller.
And not that horror movies have ever been just, kiddie fodder, but that's the way a lot of critics looked at them.
When you have, like, Friday 13th Part 17 and they're stabbing people in McDonald's, it's like, all right, well, it kind of is. Whereas this is on a completely different spectrum of that.
Because even though, like, The Exorcist was nominated for an Academy Award, like, there were people at the time of its release who's like, oh, this is just, too much. This shouldn't be in the conversation because it's, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, because at the time you had people, like, passing out in the theater while they were watching it. So nowadays you will see that and it's like you said, ABC Family's got you beat with CSI or whatever.
So I think people have seen over time that, horror can be, like, gruesome, like a fun house ride, or it can be, a serious, contemplative movie that goes after, like, the prestige audiences and critics. Like, you can have, horror can encompass all these things, and all these elements of horror can be used in different types of movies that we have seen. So, I think this was just, a good milestone for the genre moving forward. Like, it can be more than just slashers or ghost stories. You can have it encompass different types of movies. So, like, to wrap up my feelings, I think Silence of the Lambs is a, great movie that's still fun to watch now. The series as a whole is a little bit mixed, especially like Hannibal Rising being the last theatrical. Like Silence of the Lambs, great movie. Manhunter, I really like. Hannibal and Red Dragon, they're both fun watches, but not anything I revisit all that often. The NBC show Hannibal you should definitely watch because it's awesome. Derek, do you have any closing thoughts on this?
I don't know. I just think it's a movie, if you haven't ever watched it, it's something you really need to watch.
Well, we just spoiled all the
but me personally, I'm a person that I sometimes like to know what happens. It doesn't detract from me to know what happens. But I also feel like if you haven't seen it yet, just being alive in this day and time with all the media references, you already know.
Yeah.
So I don't think, like, if you walk into Friday 13th, you already know what's going to happen if you've never seen it, just because there's so many references. So I don't think that if anybody just watches it and watches just losing anything, they already know. For the most part, unless they lived under, like, a rock or something.
And this is a movie, too, that I think you can sit down, not that people want to show their parents horror movies, but you can sit down and watch this with your parents. It's, just a good movie.
Yeah, they're not going to probably be like, what did I just watch? Because, like, if you have parents like ours who, like, love crime stuff and crime thrillers, like, they would like this. Now, some people might not, but I definitely think this is more of a... You don't have to worry about showing this movie to somebody and then them just not liking it.
I mean, they could not like it,
or just maybe just be like, oh, what did I just watch? So it has a pedigree. It's not Troll 2 where you're gonna watch it and like, come on, man, what did you make me watch?
Well, I think like a lot of horror films, you go into the theater and you come out, and the reaction from the crowd is like one of a few things. Like, and I've seen this with a number of movies we've seen recently.
Like It Follows, that was probably the best mix because you had people that openly were talking about how much they liked it. And then you had the 40-year-old couple that came out and it's like, what the did we just watch?
Well, yeah, they said that was the worst thing I've ever seen. I would have left in the middle if I didn't have to pay for it. So I think this is one of those movies that probably didn't have that reaction, but it's also not a full-blown horror film. But so I think that'll wrap up our discussion of Silence of the Lambs. Thanks for watching.